My name is Emily and I do historical costuming. Welcome to my channel. Today we are continuing the 18th century Italian gown project by making not one, not two, but 3 petticoats. Think of a petticoat as a type of skirt, one that can be worn as an innermost layer close to the body or as an outer layer, kind of like any other skirt. You might also hear petticoats compared to the slips that we might wear under skirts ourselves today. In the 18th century, women of all social classes in Western Europe would have worn at least one and probably more petticoats. They provided modesty, warmth, and helped a woman achieve a fashionable silhouette. Today, I'm going to be making 3 different styles of petticoat to wear underneath my Italian gown. Now, just a disclaimer, I am not a fashion historian, and so the terms that I'm going to be using to describe these different petticoats may or may not, probably are not historically accurate. They're just the terms that it makes the most sense to me to use. So the first petticoat is what I'm calling an underpetticoat. It will be worn over the shift but underneath the stays and should be made out of a sturdier fabric like cotton matelassé, don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, or heavy linen or heavy wool. And this is to help the petticoat keep its shape more and prevent the other layers from getting tangled in your legs. Now, I'm going to be using a lightweight linen for mine because I had some extra lying around and I didn't want to order more fabric. The other 2 petticoats are both what I'm calling overpetticoats, or really you could just say petticoat. They're worn on top of the stays and on top of the bum pad, but they're made of different fabric. The first will be a medium weight red linen, which will help smooth out the lines of the bum pad. The second will be a blue silk taffeta, which will show and peek out the front of the Italian gown that I'm going to make later. And both of these petticoats require a slightly different construction technique from the underpetticoat because they need to be a bit longer in the back so that they go over the curve of the bum pad. So that's the plan. 3 different petticoats, all to be worn at the same time. Let's go do it. If you enjoy this video and want to see more like it, hit the subscribe button and the bell to be notified when I post a new video. Thanks! The underpetticoat is made of 2 panels of linen that are the same size. The width of each of these panels is determined by how wide your fabric is selvage to selvage. The length should go from your waist down to about your ankles or however long you want your petticoat to be. I left myself a lot of extra here thinking that I could take it up later in the hem if needed, but if I got it too short on the first round, then I wouldn't be able to add more fabric once I had cut it. So each of these 2 fabric panels needs to be pleated to fit around your waist. So in the very center of the panel, I did a box pleat at 4 inches wide, and then kind of radiating out from each of those edges of the box pleat, I did a series of knife pleats, roughly an inch, half an inch to an inch. I just eyeballed it out until I got to the edge of the fabric. Towards the edge of the fabric, I did kind of adjust the width of my pleats to end up with the desired fabric width. So I could have done a lot of math here and gotten all of my pleats exactly the same size to go from my 52-inch wide fabric down to, my half a waist measurement, but I didn't feel like it needed to be that accurate, and so I just eyeballed it, and then the last several pleats, like some of them are bigger, some of them are larger, just to kind of like massage it into the right measurement. One other thing to note here is that you do want it to be slightly more than half of your waist, because the back panel and the front panel, when you put it on, they're going to actually overlap some. The back panel is pleated very similarly, except that you start with a reverse box pleat, again of 4 inches wide, and then each of your knife pleats, instead of kind of radiating outward away from the center, you want them to be pointed inwards towards the center of the fabric. The next step was to sew the side seams together, and because these seams are on the selvage edges, I just did a single row of stitches and left the edges unfinished. I also stopped the side seams about 10 inches from the top of the fabric, and that's to leave enough room for the edges to overlap when you wear it. And then also you actually want to be able to kind of like put your hand through to access a pocket or any of your other like undergarments that you're wearing underneath. To finish those upper edges and create the pocket opening, I just folded the selvage edge back towards itself, towards the inside of the fabric, and pleated it with my fingers. Then I just top stitched that down. And when I got to the point where my seam ended, where my side seam ended, I turned the fabric and sewed horizontally across that seam, turned it again, and then sewed up the other side. And this was a really easy, clean way to finish it, and it also provided some extra strength right at the top of the side seam where it might start to get some wear and tear from you pulling on it. For the waistband, I used 1 inch wide plain twill tape. I cut 2 pieces of equal length, one to be used for the front panel and one for the back panel. Then I took the top pleated edge of each panel and centered it in the tape and pinned it down. I sewed straight across the bottom edge of the tape first, doing my best to stay as close to the edge of the tape as possible. Then I used some sewing shears to clean up the top edge of the pleats to make that edge more even and to get rid of all the little scraggly bits that had formed. After doing that, it was super easy to fold the rest of the waistband down over the top edge and stitch it in place. I folded the ties in half too and stitched right down the edge of those. Next, it was time to do the hem. I knew that I hadn't quite gotten the edge of the fabric straight when I cut it initially, so to make sure that I had an even hemline, I measured down from the top of the waistband 31 inches, which is how long I wanted my petticoat to be. I did that all the way around and then just put a pin where 31 inches hit. Then I folded the edge up twice, making sure to encase the raw edge, and making sure that the bottom fold lined up with the pins that I had set for the length. Because of my initial unevenness of cutting the fabric, the top folded edge wasn't in the same place all the way around, and since I knew I was going to be top stitching this hem and it would be visible from the front, I measured upwards from the bottom to form a line that I would stitch on. Then I stitched along that line, doing my best to run through each of the blue dots I had measured onto the fabric. And there you have it. The first petticoat is complete. The overpetticoat is constructed similarly to the underpetticoat in a lot of ways, with most of the differences in construction coming down to the fact that you're wearing it over the stays and over the bum pad, and so it needs to be a bit longer in the back than it is in the front to go over that increased amount of space in the rear. To figure out how long I needed the back panel to be, I put my bum pad on and then took a tape measure and measured down from my waist over the bum pad to my ankles. Once the panels are cut, they needed to be pleated using the same pleating pattern as with the underpetticoat. But this time I thought I would come up with a little bit easier of a way to pleat them. So with the underpetticoat and trying to pleat the linen on the floor on my rug, the fabric was catching on the rug, and so it kept like pulling the pleats out of alignment the more pleats I put into the fabric. So this time I thought, well, what if I use my new bootstrap dress form, which I just made for myself. I will put a link to the video for the making of that bootstrap dress form, so you can go take a look at that if you want to. But I thought, wouldn't it be a lot easier to pleat the fabric vertically on my dress form, and then I'd have a much better sense for exactly how much I needed to pleat around my waist as well. This actually worked incredibly well, and I am so glad I had the idea to do it this way. I sewed up the side seams and the pocket openings exactly the same way as with the underpetticoat. And then the next step was the next big difference between the two construction methods. So you basically put the petticoat on top of your underpetticoat, your stays, your bum pad, everything that you're going to be wearing underneath it when you wear it. And then you measure upwards from the ground to where the bottom of the petticoat hits. And you have to do this all the way around, making sure that it is even all the way. And the way that you get this to work is you put the petticoat on either yourself, or if you're lucky you have a dress form like I do. And then you take your waist tape and tie it snugly over the top. So that way, when you notice a little difference, you can pull it up or pull it down, and it will stay nice and in place against the tied waist tape. This is way harder to do than it looks, because when you pull on one section of the gown to get it straight, that section is going to pull on another area that maybe measured perfectly 2 seconds ago, and now it's going to be slightly off because you adjusted the area next to it. So it is very tedious, very time consuming. You have to be very meticulous and be comfortable crawling around on the floor. And I didn't get mine exactly perfect in all areas. I sort of got to a point where I decided, okay, this is good enough. It looks even to my naked eye, which really that's the most important thing. And yeah, basically just got it to a point where I thought everything looked even. I should also mention, in case it wasn't clear, that you need to hem the petticoat before doing this. Once I liked where I had everything placed, I transferred the pins that were holding together my pleats at the top of my fabric to the pleats located where I had that waist tape. So at this point, that waist tape will be sitting on the outside of the petticoat. And you simply top stitch it down on the bottom edge. Then you take the rest of that waist tape, as well as all the extra fabric sticking out from the edge, and fold it under to the inside of the petticoat. Then you stitch down the free edge of the waist tape. Once the waistband was stitched in place, I took pinking shears to the edge on the inside just to stop it fraying any further. This is all the finishing that I'm going to do to the edge of this piece of fabric. That little extra bulk at the waistline will kind of add some extra padding to the bum area, And actually, it's period correct. They wouldn't have finished this off any neater because it's on the inside, it's not going to be shown. There wasn't this obsession with the inside of clothing being all nice and neat and pretty. You really only needed the outside part that was going to be seen to be pretty. Leaving this edge unfinished also has the added advantage of making it easy to pick out any stitches and have a nice big length of cloth to work with later if I want to redo the garment. To wear the petticoat, you tie the back first, bringing the straps around to the front of your waist and tying them. Then you grab the front, which should be kind of hanging down, pull it up to your waist, bring the strings around to the back, and tie them. I'm pretty darn pleased with how this red petticoat turned out, and I couldn't resist playing a little dress up once I had it finished. The blue silk petticoat is constructed very similarly to the red linen one, except that instead of constructing it with the selvage edges of the fabric at the side seams, I decided to use the selvage for the bottom edge so that I could avoid having to hem it. This silk does fray really easily though, and so for the side seams, I really needed to make sure I was completely encasing those raw edges. So I decided to do French seams on the side seams, and to do that, I laid out my fabric pieces with wrong side to wrong side and pinned them together. Next, I sewed that seam together, easy peasy. Next, I took my fabric shears and cleaned up that raw edge, so getting away all those little scrappy bits that have already started to fray. Then I turned the skirt inside out, basically encasing that raw edge in the fabric. I don't know, this is a horrible way to explain French seaming, and it's something that it took me a really long time to wrap my head around, but hopefully this makes sense. So you basically turn the fabric in on itself and then make sure that what you've already sewn, that raw edge that I just cut through, is sandwiched between the two new layers of fabric here. Then you sew down the edge, making sure that you're far enough in from the edge that you're not going to catch the raw edge in your line of stitches. Once done, you should end up with a seam that looks like this from the inside. Look at that badonkadonk. I mean, check that out. At this point, I ended up needing to redo the pleats for this because that silk was so slippery that it just got very wonky and wobbly, and I really wanted these pleats to be nice and crisp and pretty looking. Once I had my pleats done again, I followed the same process as I did with the red petticoat of evening up the bottom by measuring from the floor up to the bottom edge. Then I stitched in the waistband the same way as well. And here's the finished product. I love how these petticoats turned out. I think they look really beautiful together, and I can't wait to make the Italian gown to complete the look.